effectively just going to sort of set the scene with the global payments ecosystem, how it works. Obviously, we have many different characters that come into this sort of ecosystem. You have banks, you have MasterCard, Visa, payment gateways, payment processors, Stripe being a payment processor / gateway. You have merchants, you have acquirers, issuers, lots of terminology, lots of characters, and let's dive straight into it. Jonty, would you like to set the scene?
Essentially, what they refer to is the four-party payment system. And so there's essentially four main parties that I'll break down. So you get the merchant, and the merchant is essentially the online company or the company selling to a customer. So in this example, it would be Spotify that Luca mentioned, or say Amazon. They would be known as the merchant.
On the merchant also,
yeah,
where there's a lot of layering as well, sorry to just jump in, is that like the merchant then, for say for instance, you're thinking about someone like Shopify, who obviously has merchants. Like the merchant then is the customer of Shopify who has their own business running on Shopify's platform, right?
Yeah. So as I understand it, yeah, I'm not 100% sure on Shopify exactly, but it would essentially be the business, in this case, selling the products. So that it would make sense probably in that situation.
Yeah.
So then you obviously get the card holder. That would be me and you, the ordinary people who are buying whatever we want from, say, from Amazon or our subscription to Spotify. You then get the card issuer. So this would be the bank account of the customer who has the credit card / debit card. So a bank would issue you a credit card, and that's why they're known as the card issuer. You then get the merchant acquirer. So the merchant acquirer is the merchant's bank account. And so they're essentially, the merchant's bank. So that's pretty simple to understand.
And because
Now,
they're acquiring funds from the issuer's bank, right? So that's why they're called the acquirer.
yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So now where things start getting a little bit more interesting is the back end systems between all of these players. So we all know about MasterCard and Visa. So these are known as the card networks, and essentially these operate between the card issuer and the merchant acquirer. So the two banks, they're essentially like the railroads between these two banks, and they transmit the information between each of the banks. And so what's quite interesting about those businesses is they're getting a fee on every single payment that's going through at any point in time in the world. And like Visa, I think, has over 50% market share. MasterCard's more around 30%. Then you get, I think, Discover and American Express as well. And so, like,
and also,
just think how
Jonty,
many payments.
yeah, it's crazy. Like I was about to say, just to throw out a statistic for everyone listening, is like, just so you can understand the scale, isn't it true that they process, Visa and MasterCard, I don't know if it's collectively or each, that they process something like 1 million payments per second, right?
It wouldn't surprise me. I mean,
Or it could
so
even be like 50 million.
the terminology they like to use is gross payment volume. So that would be the sales volume of, or the dollar or whatever currency amount is actually going through these networks. So Visa and MasterCard take a small percentage. So I mean, they're essentially getting that fee on all of that gross payment volume. It must be outrageous. Okay, so that's one of the back end systems known as the card networks between the merchant acquirer and the card issuer. And then between the merchant and the merchant acquirer is what we get, or what we call the independent sales organization. So this refers to point of sale systems, payment gateways, etc. And this is where Stripe falls. So they essentially are the payment gateway, and they essentially transmit information between the merchant and the merchant acquirer. And so essentially how an example would work. So I'm just going to like briefly take you through how the whole, like, a payment would actually work. So the first step is that there has to be this authorization. So the cardholder's information and transaction details are transmitted by the payment gateway to the merchant acquirer. From there, the information is transmitted via the card network, e.g. Visa/MasterCard, to the cardholder's issuing bank for approval. The card issuer's response, so the bank, being the issuing bank or the card issuer, then has to approve the transaction. Is this a valid card, valid person, do they exist, etc. And that's then approved or denied and then transmitted back to the merchant acquirer, being the bank account of the merchant. And then this is once again relayed back via the payment gateway to the merchant. And so this is, I think, from here, this is where I think it differs slightly depending on the currency, depending on the payment gateway. But in my research, I came across basically where they said that each business day, the merchant would send a batch of approved payments to the merchant acquirer, and then the merchant acquirer will deposit funds based on those sales into the merchant's account via an automated clearinghouse. So that automated clearinghouse in South Africa would be something like BankServe. And then essentially it debits the merchant's account for processing fees. So they're making a small fee there as well. Then it says that the card networks debit the issuing bank's account, obviously with the amount, and credits the merchant acquirer's account for the net amount. And so this would be the gross receipt less interchange and card network fees. So this is another terminology now we have to get out the way, is the interchange fee. And this is a fee but from the merchant bank to the issuing bank. And so the issuing bank gets this fee and most of it because they take on that risk of issuing the card and all the costs that go along with that, such as like advertising, loyalty programs, I think. But essentially, they're getting compensated for the risk of issuing the credit card.
Also, that interchange fee exists between the acquirer and issuer bank, because so that the balance of acquirers and issuers is kept in balance. The amount, because obviously all of the fees are actually, if you think about it, without interchange, are actually flowing all the way to the acquirer, i.e., the merchant's bank account, the business's bank account. And then you think to yourself, oh well, without interchange, the customer's bank isn't actually getting anything out of this transaction.
Yeah,
So the
they get a small amount.
Yeah, the interchange is there to sort of motivate more banks and give some incentive to banks to actually issue cards. Otherwise, everyone would just be acquirer banks, and the whole system would break, basically.
Exactly. Just to like kind of give you an idea of those fees within there, I just want to sum it up with a little example. So essentially, there's something that's called the merchant discount, and so this is the net fee essentially, or the total fee that the merchant will pay for having this online payment facilitated. And so this is a payment, say, that Stripe would pay. So they charge generally 2.9% plus 30 cents per transaction. So as you can imagine, that's quite a hefty fee, right? And shame the merchants have to basically pay a lot of money just to be able to accept payments. What makes up that merchant discount is a few fees, and we spoke about the various players in there, but essentially there's the interchange fee that goes to the card issuer. Now that's the bulk of the fee. Then there's the card network fee, which is it's not nearly as large as the interchange fee. And then what you're left with is what we call the markup. And so some markup goes to the acquiring bank, and another markup goes to the independent sales organization, e.g. Stripe. And so interestingly, when I was researching, is the fee that's left over is essentially what Stripe can take. So where interchange fees are high, they can actually make losses in some situations. But apparently, it says where debit cards are used, and interchange fees are low, then they can make large margins on those transactions, which is quite interesting.